Woman gives birth to a snake instead of a baby. This is a true story. The delivery room was a cacophony of hurried voices, sterile beeps, and the muffled sobs of a woman in labor. Sweat plastered Jasmine Delgado's raven-black hair to her forehead as she writhed on the hospital bed, her fingers clutching the sheets with desperate strength. The fluorescent lights above her head cast a harsh, sterile glow, making the scene feel surreal. "Push, Jasmine. Push." Dr. Meredith Vaughn's voice cut through the chaos. The obstetrician, seasoned but visibly strained, was perched at the foot of the bed. Her gloved hands hovered, ready to guide the newborn into the world. "I am pushing," Jasmine screamed, her voice breaking. Her husband, Carlos, stood at her side, his hands clammy as he tried to soothe her. His soft whispers of encouragement were lost in the noise of the monitors, the rhythmic whooshing of the fetal heartbeat filling the room. Jasmine's pregnancy had been anything but smooth. From the start, there had been strange complications, unexplained pains, vivid nightmares of slithering creatures, and a peculiar craving for raw eggs. She had brushed them off as the quirks of pregnancy. The doctors had run test after test, finding nothing unusual. Yet now, in this moment, an unshakable dread clawed at her chest. As she bore down again, a sharp pain ripped through her abdomen, far worse than the contractions. Jasmine let out an agonized scream, her back arching violently. "Something's wrong," she gasped, her eyes wild as they darted to Dr. Vaughn. The doctor's brow furrowed deeply, her calm professional demeanor beginning to crack. "Okay, we're almost there. Just one more big push, Jasmine." But Jasmine's instincts told her otherwise. This wasn't normal. None of it was normal. The pain was searing, unnatural, as though her body was being torn apart from the inside. The nurse assisting Dr. Vaughn, Rebecca, a young woman with kind eyes, noticed something odd. "Doctor, the umbilical cord looks strange." "What do you mean?" Dr. Vaughn asked, her voice tight as she leaned closer. The other nurse, Carl, stepped around the table to take a look. Rebecca hesitated, her eyes wide. "It's scaled?" "Scaled?" Carlos repeated, his voice rising in panic. Before anyone could process the statement, Jasmine let out a blood-curdling scream. Her entire body convulsed, and suddenly the monitors began to beep erratically. "Her heart rate is spiking," Carl shouted. "Jasmine, stay with us," Dr. Vaughn barked. With a final agonizing push, Jasmine's body gave way. The room fell silent, save for Jasmine's ragged breathing and the frantic beeping of the machines. Dr. Vaughn reached out, expecting to cradle a crying baby in her arms. Instead, her hands froze. A collective gasp echoed through the room as the thing emerged, a slimy, coiled figure, its skin glistening with amniotic fluid. A snake. The creature slid onto the delivery table with an audible hiss, its scales shimmering in the harsh fluorescent light. It was no ordinary snake. Its length was abnormal for a newborn anything, and its eyes, bright, golden, and eerily intelligent, blinked as though aware of its surroundings. The room was paralyzed in stunned silence. Carlos stumbled backward, his hand over his mouth. What the hell is that?" Jasmine was too weak to lift her head, but her eyes widened as she saw the horrified expressions of the medical team. Is my baby okay?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Vaughn's hands trembled. She had delivered thousands of babies in her career, seen the unexpected, the tragic, and the miraculous. But this defied everything she knew. "Call NICU," she snapped, her professional instincts kicking in. "We need neonatal support immediately." Rebecca didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the snake, which now coiled itself tightly into a protective spiral, its tiny tongue flicking in and out. "Rebecca?" Dr. Vaughn barked, snapping the nurse out of her trance. Rebecca fumbled for the phone on the wall, dialing the emergency line. "We need neonatal assistance in room 6. Now." Carlos, shaking, moved toward the bed. "Jasmine, don't look." "Don't," his voice cracked. He couldn't bring himself to say the words. "What's wrong?" Jasmine croaked, her voice filled with panic. She tried to sit up, but the effort made her head spin. "Why won't anyone answer me? Where's my baby?" "Jasmine, listen to me," Dr. Vaughn said, her tone careful but strained. "There's something unusual happening. I need you to stay calm while we assess." "I want to see my baby," Jasmine screamed, her voice raw with desperation. Carlos grabbed her hand, his grip firm despite his trembling fingers. "Jasmine, please, you need to rest. Let them figure this out." The door burst open as a team of neonatal specialists rushed in, led by Dr. Anika Patel, the head of neonatology. "What's the emergency?" she asked briskly, her team already donning gloves and preparing equipment. Dr. Vaughn stepped aside, gesturing to the snake. For a moment, Dr. Patel froze, her confident demeanor faltering. "What is that?" "It's what came out," Dr. Vaughn replied flatly, her voice thick with disbelief. Dr. Patel approached cautiously, crouching to examine the creature. The snake hissed, its head lifting slightly as though warning her to keep her distance. "It's alive. But this isn't possible." "How is this possible?" "Ask me again when I've had time to process it," Dr. Vaughn muttered, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. "Right now we need to stabilize Jasmine. She's lost a lot of blood." As the team worked to care for Jasmine, the snake seemed to grow restless. Its golden eyes darted around the room, landing on Jasmine, who was still too weak to notice. Slowly, it began to slither toward her. "Stop it!" Carlos shouted, stepping in front of his wife. He grabbed a metal instrument tray from the counter, holding it like a shield. "Don't let it near her." "Carlos, calm down," Dr. Patel barked. "We don't even know what this thing is yet. Hurting it could make things worse." "It's a snake," Carlos snapped. "It shouldn't even be here, let alone—" Before he could finish, Jasmine's voice cut through the commotion. "Let me see it." The room fell silent again. Carlos turned to her, his face pale. "Jasmine, no. You don't know what it is." "I don't care," she interrupted, her voice trembling. That came out of me. I need to see it." Against his better judgment, Carlos stepped aside. The snake slithered closer, stopping just short of the bed. Jasmine forced herself to sit up, her entire body protesting the effort. When her eyes met the snake's, a strange calm washed over her. It's not hurting anyone," she murmured, her hand inching toward it. "Jasmine, no." Carlos lunged to stop her, but Dr. Patel held up a hand. "Wait," she said softly. "Look." The snake lifted its head higher, tilting slightly as Jasmine's fingers brushed against its scales. It didn't hiss or recoil. Instead, it seemed to relax, its body loosening from its tense coil. Jasmine's lips quivered. "I don't understand, but it's mine. I can feel it." Carlos shook his head, backing away. "This isn't right. This isn't natural." Dr. Vaughn exchanged a look with Dr. Patel, neither of them knowing what to say. The tension in the room was thick, the air heavy with questions no one dared ask aloud. Then, the snake did something that made everyone freeze. It opened its mouth, not to strike but to emit a low, almost melodic hum. The sound vibrated through the room, strange yet oddly soothing. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. "It's communicating." The humming sound reverberated through the room, soft but insistent. Everyone stared, captivated and unnerved, as the snake's golden eyes stayed locked on Jasmine. The melodic vibration seemed to calm her, the tension in her body visibly easing. Carlos stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. This isn't normal. Jasmine, we need to get away from it. Now." But Jasmine didn't move. Her trembling fingers continued to stroke the snake's smooth scales. "It's not dangerous," she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "I don't know how I know, but it's not." Dr. Patel stepped closer, her clinical instincts warring with the sheer impossibility of what was happening. "Jasmine, I understand you feel connected to it, but we need to examine it. For your safety, and for its own." Jasmine hesitated, her hand lingering on the snake. "You're not going to hurt it?" "No," Dr. Patel assured her, her tone firm. "But we need to understand what this is. We've never seen anything like this before." Reluctantly, Jasmine nodded. "Okay, but be careful." Dr. Patel gestured to one of her team members, a tall man named Dr. Lucas Hensley, to retrieve a containment unit. He approached cautiously, carrying a clear acrylic box with air holes. The snake, sensing movement, coiled slightly tighter around itself, its golden eyes narrowing. "It's okay," Jasmine whispered as though soothing a fussy child. The snake relaxed again, allowing Dr. Hensley to gently scoop it into the box. He secured the lid, locking it with a soft click. As the snake was carried out of the room, the air seemed to grow heavier. Jasmine's heart ached in a way she couldn't explain, as if a piece of her had been taken away. "Where are you taking it?" she asked, her voice cracking. "To the lab," Dr. Patel replied. "We'll run tests and figure out what we're dealing with." Carlos interjected, his voice sharp. "And what about Jasmine? You're all acting like this is just another medical case, but my wife just gave birth to a snake. What does that mean for her?" Dr. Vaughn, who had been quiet since the delivery, stepped forward. "You're right to be concerned. We need to run some tests on Jasmine as well, blood work, imaging, everything." We have to rule out any underlying conditions that could have caused this. Caused what? Carlos snapped. This isn't a condition. This is something else. Something we can't explain. Jasmine reached for his hand, her touch gentle. Carlos, please. Let them do what they need to. I need answers too. Reluctantly, Carlos nodded. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I just don't want anything to happen to you. The medical team moved quickly, drawing Jasmine's blood and performing an ultrasound to ensure there were no remnants of the pregnancy. As the hours dragged on, the tension between Jasmine and Carlos grew. He paced the room, his face a mask of frustration and fear. Finally, Dr. Vaughn returned, holding a tablet. Her expression was grim. We've reviewed your test, Jasmine. There's nothing abnormal. No signs of infection, no genetic markers that could explain this. Physically, you're perfectly healthy. Jasmine frowned. Then how do you explain what happened? Dr. Vaughn hesitated. We can't. Not yet. Before Jasmine could respond, there was a knock at the door. Dr. Patel entered, her face pale. She was holding a file, her hands shaking slightly. We've analyzed the snake, she began, her voice low. And it's not entirely a snake. What do you mean? Carlos demanded. Dr. Patel set the file down, opening it to reveal a series of charts and images. She pointed to one, a close-up of the snake's scales. These scales aren't like anything we've seen in nature. They're composed of a material that's part organic, part metallic. It's almost as if it's not from this world, Carlos finished, his voice dropping to a whisper. Dr. Patel didn't respond, but the look in her eyes said enough. Jasmine's chest tightened. So, what is it? What does this mean? Dr. Patel hesitated, then said, we don't know yet. But the way it responded to you, it suggests a bond. A biological connection we don't understand. Carlos ran a hand through his hair, his frustration boiling over. You're telling me my wife gave birth to some kind of alien snake? And you have no answers? Before anyone could reply, a loud crash echoed from down the hallway. Everyone froze, their eyes darting to the door. A nurse burst into the room, her face pale and panicked. It's escaped, she cried. The snake. It broke out of containment. What? Dr. Patel exclaimed, rushing toward the nurse. It smashed through the box, the nurse said, her voice trembling. And it's growing? The nurse's words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Carlos shot a panicked look at Jasmine, who sat frozen on the hospital bed, her face pale. Dr. Patel and Dr. Vaughn exchanged a grim glance before springing into action. What do you mean it's growing? Dr. Patel demanded, grabbing the nurse by the arm. How big is it now? The nurse shook her head, struggling to catch her breath. I don't know. It's doubled in size at least. And it's moving fast. We tried to block it off, but it just slithered through like it knew where it was going. Carlos cursed under his breath. Where was it last seen? Near the east wing, the nurse replied, her voice shaking. It was heading toward the patient rooms. Dr. Patel turned to Dr. Vaughn. We need security to lock down the floor. If that thing is dangerous, it's not. Jasmine interrupted, her voice rising. All eyes turned to her. It's not dangerous. I don't know how I know, but I do. It's just looking for me. Carlos stared at her in disbelief. You can't be serious, Jasmine. That thing isn't your baby, it's a monster. Her eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. I felt it when it came out of me. It's connected to me. It's scared and is trying to find me. Before Carlos could argue, another crash sounded, closer this time. Everyone flinched as the sound of shattering glass echoed through the hallway. It's coming here, Dr. Vaughn said, her voice tense. She turned to the medical team. Get the patients out of this wing. Now. Dr. Patel hesitated. And what about Jasmine? Carlos stepped forward. I'm taking her out of here. No? Jasmine shouted, gripping his arm. I'm staying. It won't hurt me. You don't know that. Carlos yelled, his voice trembling with fear. Jasmine's expression hardened. I do. And if you trust me, you'll let me handle this. Before anyone could respond, the door creaked open. The room fell deathly silent. Slithering in through the gap, the snake emerged. Only it wasn't the same creature they had seen before. It was now nearly 6 feet long, its scales gleaming with a faint, iridescent glow. Its golden eyes scanned the room, landing on Jasmine. Carlos instinctively stepped in front of her, his arms spread wide. Stay back, he shouted, his voice cracking. The snake hissed softly but didn't strike. Instead, it lifted its head, tilting it as though studying Carlos. Then, slowly and deliberately, it turned its gaze back to Jasmine. "It's okay," Jasmine whispered, slipping off the bed despite her weakened state. "Let me go to it." "No." Carlos grabbed her arm, but she shook him off, her resolve unyielding. "Trust me," she said, her eyes locking with his. "Please?" Carlos hesitated, his heart pounding. Finally, with a reluctant nod, he stepped aside. Jasmine approached the snake cautiously, her bare feet cold against the tile floor. The snake didn't move, its body coiled loosely as it waited. When she reached out, it lifted its head, pressing its smooth scales against her palm. A wave of warmth surged through Jasmine, unlike anything she had ever felt. Her mind was flooded with images, alien landscapes bathed in soft light, creatures with shimmering scales moving gracefully through the air. She saw herself, glowing with a strange inner light, holding the snake as if it were a child. The connection was undeniable. This wasn't just a creature. It was hers. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "You're mine, aren't you?" The snake emitted the same low hum it had made earlier, the sound filling the room with a strange sense of peace. The medical staff, who had been frozen with fear, slowly began to relax, their tension easing. Even Carlos, though visibly uneasy, lowered his guard. Dr. Patel stepped forward cautiously. "Jasmine, what's happening?" Jasmine turned to her, her eyes still glistening with tears. "It's showing me things. Memories maybe. I don't understand everything, but it's not from here. It's not like us." Carlos swallowed hard. "So it's alien?" Jasmine nodded slowly. "I think so. But it's not dangerous. It's scared. It just wants to be with me." Dr. Vaughn's voice was tight. "Whether it's dangerous or not, we can't just leave this thing loose in the hospital. We need to contain it." "No," Jasmine said firmly, her protective instincts flaring. She turned to the snake, which had wrapped itself loosely around her feet. "I'll go with it. Wherever it needs to go." Carlos grabbed her shoulders, his face pale. "You can't be serious. Jasmine, we don't know what this thing is or what it's capable of. What if it hurts you?" "It won't," she said, her voice steady. "It's a part of me. I can't explain it, but I know I'm the only one who can keep it calm." Before anyone could argue further, the snake began to hum again, louder this time. The air seemed to shimmer, the light in the room dimming slightly. Jasmine gasped as a strange, glowing mark appeared on her wrist, a swirling pattern that pulsed faintly with light. Dr. Patel's eyes widened. "What is that?" Jasmine stared at the mark, her heart racing. "I don't know. But I think it's a sign." The snake coiled tighter around her, its golden eyes gleaming with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. And in that moment she knew, this was just the beginning. The faint glow from the mark on Jasmine's wrist pulsed rhythmically, matching the snake's humming. The tension in the room was electric, everyone frozen in place, unsure of what would happen next. Carlos's voice was a low, desperate whisper. "Jasmine, think about this. Whatever's happening to you, we don't know if it's safe. Please let the doctors handle this." Jasmine turned to him, her expression a mixture of sorrow and determination. "I love you, Carlos, but this is something I have to face. I feel it, like it's calling to me." The snake shifted, its body coiling more tightly around her feet. Jasmine winced slightly at the pressure but didn't pull away. Instead, she looked down at the creature, her free hand gently stroking its shimmering scales. "It's not just a snake. It's something more." Dr. Patel cleared her throat, her voice unsteady. "Jasmine, I understand that you feel connected to this being. But we need to consider what's best for your health and safety. That mark on your wrist, it's emitting energy. I don't know what kind of effects it could have." Jasmine nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the snake. "I understand, but I think this energy is why I'm still alive. Whatever it is, it's not hurting me, it's helping me." Dr. Vaughn frowned. "Helping you how?" "Your vitals are stable, yes, but there's no proof this thing is keeping you alive." Before Jasmine could respond, the mark on her wrist flared brighter, casting the room in a warm, golden light. Everyone shielded their eyes, the intensity growing until it was almost blinding. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the light dimmed. When they looked again, Jasmine's entire demeanor had changed. Her eyes glowed faintly, the same golden hue as the snake's. The exhaustion and frailty that had marked her post-delivery state were gone, replaced by an eerie calm and strength. Carlos took a step back, his face pale. "What just happened to you?" Jasmine touched her face, startled by the strange warmth radiating from her skin. "I don't know, but I feel stronger." Dr. Patel stepped forward, holding a medical scanner she had retrieved from her kit. "Jasmine, may I?" Jasmine nodded, extending her arm. The snake hissed softly but didn't interfere as Dr. Patel ran the scanner over Jasmine's wrist and chest. Her brow furrowed as she read the results. "This is impossible," Dr. Patel murmured. "Your blood pressure, oxygen levels and cell regeneration rates are off the charts. It's as if your body is healing itself at an accelerated rate." Carlos shook his head, his voice rising. "That's not a good thing. This isn't normal, Jasmine. You're human, you're not supposed to be able to do that." Jasmine looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with sadness. "Maybe I'm not entirely human anymore." Carlos's face crumpled, his voice breaking. "Don't say that. You're my wife, Jasmine. You're the woman I married, the mother of our—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. His eyes flickered to the snake and his throat tightened. "Our baby?" Before anyone could say more, the door to the room flew open. A team of armed security guards stormed in, their weapons trained on the snake. The lead guard, a stocky man with a grizzled beard, barked, "Step away from the creature. Now." Jasmine instinctively stepped in front of the snake, shielding it with her body. "No. Don't hurt it." "Ma'am, that thing is a threat," the guard said firmly. "We can't risk it harming anyone else in this hospital." "It hasn't harmed anyone," Jasmine shouted, her voice laced with anger. "It's scared and it's trying to protect itself. Please, just let us figure this out without violence." The guards hesitated, their fingers hovering over the triggers. The snake's golden eyes narrowed and its body tensed as if preparing to strike. Dr. Patel raised her hands, stepping between the guards and Jasmine. "Wait. We don't fully understand what we're dealing with here. If you attack it, you could trigger something far worse than what we've already seen." The lead guard scowled but lowered his weapon slightly. "Doctor, this thing broke containment and put everyone in danger. We can't just stand by and hope for the best." Jasmine's voice was calm but firm. "You don't have to hope for the best. I'll take responsibility for it." Carlos looked at her, his expression a mix of disbelief and betrayal. "What are you saying, Jasmine?" She turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know where this will lead, but I can't abandon it. It's my baby, Carlos. I have to protect it." Carlos's shoulders slumped, his voice barely audible. "And what about me? What about us?" Jasmine reached out to him, her glowing hand trembling. "I'll always love you. But this is bigger than us." Before he could respond, the snake began to hum again, louder and more insistent. The golden mark on Jasmine's wrist flared brighter, and the air around them shimmered. The guards shouted, raising their weapons, but it was too late. A wave of light erupted from the snake and Jasmine, enveloping the room. The last thing anyone saw before the light consumed them was Jasmine's glowing eyes, filled with determination and sorrow. When the light faded, the room was unrecognizable. The harsh fluorescence above had dimmed, replaced by a soft, golden glow emanating from the walls. The air felt thicker, warmer, and carried a faint hum as though the room itself were alive. The guards, Dr. Patel, Dr. Vaughn, Carlos, and Jasmine stood frozen, trying to comprehend their surroundings. The snake coiled around Jasmine's feet, its eyes now brighter and more luminous than before. "What just happened?" Carlos stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine looked around, her expression both awed and confused. "I don't know. But I think we're somewhere else." Dr. Patel stepped cautiously toward the wall, running her hand along its surface. It felt smooth and cool, almost like glass, yet it shimmered under her touch. "This isn't the hospital anymore," she said, her voice hushed. "We've been transported." "Transported where?" Carlos snapped, panic rising in his tone. This snake, is messing with our reality now?" The snake hissed softly, its body shifting as it uncoiled and began slithering toward the center of the room. Jasmine instinctively followed, her hand still glowing faintly with the golden mark. "I think it's trying to show us something," she said, her voice calm despite the fear swirling in her chest. "Or it's leading us into a trap," one of the guards muttered, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Stand down," the lead guard ordered, though his voice wavered. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." The snake paused in the center of the room, raising its head high as it emitted another hum, this one deeper and more resonant. The walls around them began to shift, forming images, moving scenes that seemed to tell a story. Jasmine gasped as the first image took shape, a lush alien landscape bathed in golden light, with towering crystalline trees and rivers of liquid silver. Strange, serpentine creatures moved gracefully through the air, their scales shimmering like jewels. "This is where it came from," Jasmine whispered, her heart pounding. "It's home." The scene shifted, darkening. The once vibrant landscape was now scorched and desolate. the creatures fleeing as towering, shadowy figures descended from the skies. The hum grew mournful, and Jasmine felt a sharp pain in her chest, as though the snake's sorrow was her own. "It's a refugee," Dr. Patel said softly, her eyes wide. "It escaped whatever destroyed its world." Carlos stared at the images, his anger momentarily replaced by disbelief. "And it ended up here? Oh, why?" The images changed again, this time showing Earth, fields, oceans, cities bustling with life. Then came a hospital room and Jasmine herself, clutching her swollen belly. The scene zoomed in on her, and the mark on her wrist began to glow again. Jasmine placed a hand over her chest, tears streaming down her face. "It chose me. Somehow it knew I could help it." "Help it do what?" Carlos demanded. "Destroy us? Take over Earth?" "No," Jasmine said firmly, her voice laced with conviction. "It doesn't want to hurt us. It wants to survive. To coexist." Dr. Vaughn stepped forward, her expression skeptical but curious. "If it wanted to coexist, why didn't it come to us as something normal? Why put itself inside you? Why take on this form?" The snake hissed again, louder this time, and the images shifted to show its own perspective. It was small and vulnerable, drifting through the void of space, searching for a host, a safe harbor. It showed flashes of rejection, of fear from other creatures it had encountered. Then came Jasmine, glowing with an inner light that drew it in. "You were compatible," Dr. Patel said, her voice filled with awe. "Your body could support its form without rejecting it." Carlos shook his head, his voice rising. "So it used her. It invaded her body and made her think she was carrying a baby. That's not coexistence, that's manipulation." Jasmine turned to him, her glowing eyes filled with sadness. "Carlos, I understand why you feel that way. But I don't see it as an invasion. It gave me something too, a connection to something bigger than myself." The snake began to hum again, and the golden mark on Jasmine's wrist flared brighter. The images on the walls disappeared, replaced by a single glowing portal in the center of the room. "What is that?" one of the guards asked, his voice trembling. Jasmine felt a pull deep within her, a magnetic force urging her forward. "It's a way back," she said. "But not to the hospital. To where it came from." Carlos grabbed her arm, his face pale with fear. "You're not going through that. Jasmine, please. This thing has already taken enough from us. Don't let it take you too." Jasmine placed her glowing hand over his, her touch warm and steady. "It didn't take me, Carlos. It gave me a purpose. I don't know what's waiting on the other side, but I have to see it through." Tears filled Carlos's eyes as he shook his head. "And what about us? What about your life here?" She smiled faintly, her own tears falling. "I'll always love you. But this is my path now." The snake coiled itself around her, its hum deepening as the portal grew brighter. Jasmine stepped toward it, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. "Jasmine," Carlos cried, his voice breaking. But she didn't look back. As she stepped through the portal, the golden light consumed her and the snake, leaving the room empty and silent. Jasmine felt herself suspended in a sea of light, weightless and untethered. The golden energy surrounding her was warm and pulsing, almost like a heartbeat. The snake coiled tightly around her arm, its hum vibrating through her very core. She wasn't afraid. For the first time since this surreal journey began, she felt complete. The light began to dim, revealing a new world that seemed both alien and oddly familiar. The ground beneath her feet shimmered like glass, reflecting a sky that shifted colors, golden, lavender, and deep sapphire. Towering crystalline structures rose around her, their surfaces glowing faintly with veins of energy. The air was thick, humming with life and resonating with a rhythm she instinctively recognized. "This is its home," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum. The snake uncoiled from her arm, slithering onto the ground with an elegance that seemed to belong to this place. It raised its head, emitting a deep, resonant hum that echoed across the vast landscape. Slowly, other figures began to emerge. At first they were indistinct, shimmering silhouettes that moved like ripples in water. Then they took shape, revealing creatures similar to the snake but larger, more elaborate. Their scales reflected the shifting colors of the sky, and their golden eyes glowed with intelligence and curiosity. Jasmine stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat. The creatures surrounded her, their movements deliberate but non-threatening. One stepped forward, its massive body coiling into a spiral as it lowered its head toward her. The mark on her wrist flared again and a voice, not spoken but felt, filled her mind. "Welcome, Keeper." Jasmine's knees nearly buckled as the words washed over her. "Keeper? I don't understand. The creature tilted its head, and more images flooded her mind. She saw the snake's homeworld again, vibrant and thriving. Then came the shadows, the invaders that had brought ruin. The serpentine creatures had fled, scattering across the universe in search of sanctuary. Some had found refuge while others perished. The snake she had given birth to was among the last of its kind. The voice continued, resonating within her. You were chosen. Your essence is compatible with ours. Through you we live. Jasmine pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. I didn't ask for this. I didn't even know this was possible. Few are chosen, the voice replied. You carry the light of unity. Through your bond we can rebuild. The creatures around her hummed in unison, their combined energy creating a shimmering wave that spread across the landscape. Jasmine felt her body respond instinctively, the mark on her wrist glowing brighter. She raised her hand, and the wave intensified, illuminating the crystalline structures until the entire world seemed to awaken. What do you want me to do? Jasmine asked, her voice trembling. The lead creature lowered its head further, its golden eyes locking with hers. Guide us. Bridge the worlds. Protect the light. Before Jasmine could process the weight of its words, the sky above rippled, darkening. A chilling wind swept across the landscape, and the hum of the creatures turned sharp and discordant. What's happening? Jasmine asked, panic rising in her chest. The creature's voice was urgent now. The shadows have followed. They seek to destroy the keeper. Jasmine turned to see a growing darkness spreading across the horizon, its tendrils writhing like living shadows. The temperature dropped and an oppressive energy pressed down on her. The snake, the one she had birthed, slithered back to her, coiling protectively around her feet. Its hum was fierce and defiant, resonating with the others. Jasmine clenched her fists, the mark on her wrist pulsing wildly. She didn't know how she could help, but something deep within her stirred, a power she hadn't known she possessed. What do I do? She cried, looking to the lead creature. The light is within you, it said. Trust it. Release it. Jasmine closed her eyes, focusing on the mark. She felt the warmth spread through her body, igniting every nerve ending. The energy built rapidly, a crescendo that threatened to overwhelm her. The darkness was closer now, its tendrils reaching out toward her. Jasmine opened her eyes, and they glowed with golden light. Raising her hand, she let the energy explode outward in a brilliant wave. The light collided with the darkness, the impact shaking the ground beneath her. The shadows writhed and screamed, their forms disintegrating under the intensity of the golden glow. The creatures around her joined in, their hums amplifying the wave until the darkness was completely eradicated. When the light faded, the landscape was still and quiet. The creatures turned to Jasmine, their gazes filled with reverence. You are the keeper, the lead creature said again, its voice filled with gratitude. Our survival is your gift. Jasmine exhaled, her body trembling with exhaustion. She didn't know what the future held, but she understood one thing. She was no longer just Jasmine Delgado. She was something more, something greater. As the creatures hummed in celebration, Jasmine looked to the horizon, her heart filled with both fear and hope. Her journey was far from over, but she was ready. The landscape began to shift again, the crystalline structures glimmering brighter, resonating in harmony with the creatures' hums. Jasmine stood in the center of it all, the mark on her wrist pulsating gently as if synchronizing with the rhythm of this alien world. But exhaustion was beginning to take hold. Her knees buckled slightly and the snake, the one she had carried and birthed, coiled back around her arm, supporting her weight. It hissed softly, almost like a lullaby, its golden eyes scanning her for signs of distress. Keeper, the lead creature said, its voice still resonating in her mind. You have awakened the light and banished the shadow. But your journey has only begun. The balance must be maintained. Jasmine's voice was shaky but resolute. What balance? What am I supposed to do? The lead creature tilted its massive head, its scales shimmering with iridescent colors. Your world is at risk. The shadows have tasted your light and will seek to extinguish it. You must return and protect the connection between your world and ours. Jasmine's chest tightened. The thought of going back, to the hospital, to Carlos, to the people who couldn't understand what she had become, filled her with equal parts dread and determination. How am I supposed to protect both worlds? She asked, her voice small. You are not alone, the creature assured her. It gestured toward the smaller snake coiled around her arm. Your bond-bearer will guide and protect you. Together, you are stronger than the shadow. The other creatures began to hum again, the sound deep and resonant. The ground beneath her feet started to glow, forming a swirling portal like the one she had entered. Jasmine felt a pull, her body responding instinctively to the energy. She looked around, reluctant to leave this place but knowing she had no choice. As the portal grew brighter, the lead creature spoke one last time. "Remember, Keeper, the light within you is infinite. Trust it and it will never fail you." The portal engulfed her before she could respond. The sensation of weightlessness returned, the golden light enveloping her once more. She clung to the snake tightly, its presence grounding her as she felt herself hurtling back to earth. When the light finally receded, she found herself back in the hospital room. The transition was jarring. Gone were the shimmering landscapes and harmonious hums, replaced by the harsh fluorescence and the hum of machines. The guards, Dr. Patel, Dr. Vaughn, and Carlos stood exactly where she had left them, frozen in shock. Carlos was the first to speak, his voice a whisper. "Jasmine?" She turned to him, her glowing eyes dimming as the golden mark on her wrist faded slightly. "I'm back," she said softly. Carlos took a hesitant step forward, his hands trembling. What just happened? You disappeared. You were gone for..." He stopped, shaking his head. "I don't even know how long." "Minutes," Dr. Patel said, her voice steady despite the confusion etched on her face. "But it felt longer." Jasmine looked down at the snake still coiled around her arm. It was glowing faintly, its golden eyes scanning the room. She turned back to Carlos, her heart aching. "I don't know how to explain it all, but I was in its world. I saw where it came from, what it's been through. And now, I know why it came to me." Carlos's face was a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Why, Jasmine? Why you?" "Because I can help protect both worlds," she said simply. "The shadows are coming, Carlos. Not just for them but for us too. And I'm the only one who can stop them." The room fell silent. Even the guards, who had been clutching their weapons tightly, seemed at a loss for what to do. Dr. Patel finally spoke, her voice cautious. "Jasmine, if what you're saying is true, then we need to understand what this means. For you, for us, for everyone. We need to study this connection you have." Jasmine shook her head, a strange calm washing over her. "There's no time for studies or tests. The shadows are already looking for a way in. I can feel them." Carlos stepped closer, his voice breaking. "You're talking about fighting something we can't even see, Jasmine? Something we don't understand. How are you supposed to do that?" She looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know yet. But I know I have to try." The snake hissed softly, its hum resonating through the room. Jasmine raised her glowing wrist, the mark flaring briefly before dimming again. Dr. Vaughn, who had been silent, finally spoke. "If what you're saying is true, Jasmine, then we need to prepare. We can't just send you out there alone." Jasmine smiled faintly. "I'm not alone. I have it," she said, gesturing to the snake. "And I have all of you. But I need you to trust me." The lead guard, still gripping his weapon, let out a heavy sigh. "This is insane. But if what you're saying is real, then we don't have a choice." Carlos reached for her hand, his touch tentative. "I'm scared, Jasmine. I don't want to lose you." She squeezed his hand tightly, her glowing eyes meeting his. "You won't. But I need you to be strong for me, for us." The hum of the snake grew louder, the golden light from Jasmine's wrist casting long shadows on the walls. She straightened, her exhaustion forgotten as a new sense of purpose filled her. The battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The room seemed to pulse with energy, the snake's hum growing deeper, more insistent. Jasmine felt a shift within herself, a rising tide of power, purpose, and fear. Her body was charged with the light from the alien world, and she knew it wasn't just for her. It was for Earth, for humanity, for everything that the shadows threatened to destroy. Carlos still held her hand, his grip firm despite his fear. "Whatever happens, I'm with you," he said softly, his voice trembling but sincere. Jasmine smiled at him, her glowing eyes softening. "I'll need you, Carlos. More than ever." Dr. Patel stepped closer, her sharp mind already working to piece together the impossible. "Jasmine, if you're right about the shadows, we need to figure out how they're getting here. There has to be a connection, a breach of some kind." Jasmine nodded, the mark on her wrist pulsating faintly. "I can feel them like a distant hum in the back of my mind. It's faint now, but it's getting stronger. They're searching for a way through." Dr. Vaughn rubbed her temples, clearly overwhelmed. "If this is real, we're dealing with forces far beyond anything we've encountered. We'll need resources, scientists, technology." "No time," Jasmine interrupted. "We have to act now." The snake, still coiled around her arm, hissed softly and emitted another hum. The mark on her wrist flared and suddenly an image filled her mind, a crumbling industrial complex surrounded by darkness. The vision was vivid, almost tangible, and it left her gasping. "I saw something," she said, her voice urgent. "A place, an old factory, I think. That's where they're coming through." Dr. Patel exchanged a glance with Dr. Vaughn. "Do you recognize it?" Patel asked. Jasmine closed her eyes, focusing on the image. "It's near water, a river maybe. It's abandoned, falling apart. The shadows are gathering there, trying to break through." Carlos stepped forward. "I think I know the place. There's an old steel mill outside town by the river. It's been shut down for years." "That's it," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "That's where we need to go." The guards, who had been silent until now, stirred uneasily. The lead guard spoke up, his tone cautious. "If this place is as dangerous as you're saying, we're going to need backup. We can't just walk into something like this blind." "We won't be blind," Jasmine said, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "I can guide us. The light will show us the way." The guard hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But we'll need to move fast." Dr. Patel frowned, clearly uneasy. "Jasmine, are you sure you're ready for this? You've been through so much already." Jasmine straightened, her hand brushing over the snake's smooth scales. "I don't think I'll ever feel ready. But I don't have a choice." Carlos looked at her, his jaw tight. "Then neither do I. I'm coming with you." "No," Jasmine said firmly, her voice trembling. "It's too dangerous." "I don't care," he replied, his voice rising. "I've already almost lost you once. If you're doing this, I'm doing it with you." Jasmine's resolve faltered, her love for him warring with her fear for his safety. Finally she nodded. "Okay, but you have to stay close to me. Promise me that." "I promise," he said, taking her hand again. Dr. Patel and Dr. Vaughn began gathering what supplies they could. Flashlights, medical kits, and anything else they thought might help. The guards armed themselves, their expressions grim but determined. As they prepared to leave, the snake uncoiled from Jasmine's arm, slithering to the floor. It raised its head, its golden eyes scanning the room. Then, with surprising speed, it began to grow. Its body expanded, its scales shimmering with energy until it was nearly 10 feet long and as thick as a tree trunk. The team froze, staring in shock. Jasmine, however, wasn't afraid. She stepped closer, placing a hand on the snake's massive head. "It's protecting us," she said softly. The snake let out a deep hum, its body coiling slightly as if preparing for battle. Jasmine looked at the group, her glowing eyes filled with determination. "Let's go." The journey to the abandoned steel mill was tense and silent. The guards' vehicles rumbled through the darkened streets, their headlights cutting through the fog that had settled over the city. Jasmine sat in the back seat with Carlos, the snake curled protectively around her feet. As they approached the mill, the air grew colder, heavier. The sky above seemed darker than it should have been, the stars obscured by an unnatural haze. "This is it," Carlos said, his voice low. He pointed to the crumbling structure ahead, its skeletal remains silhouetted against the murky sky. The vehicles came to a stop, and the group stepped out cautiously. The mill loomed before them, its rusted walls and broken windows emanating in eerie silence. Jasmine's wrist flared as the mark began to glow again. The snake uncoiled itself, slithering ahead with purpose. Jasmine followed, her heart pounding in her chest. "They're here," she said, her voice barely audible. The group moved deeper into the mill, their flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence. Then they heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The shadows around them began to move, twisting and writhing like living things. "They've found us," Jasmine whispered. The snake let out a deafening hiss, its golden eyes blazing as it lunged forward. The mark on Jasmine's wrist flared brighter, and she raised her hand, the light cutting through the darkness like a blade. The battle had begun. The shadows surged from every direction, a swirling mass of darkness that filled the air with an otherworldly chill. The guards raised their weapons instinctively, but their bullets seemed to vanish into the void, swallowed by the living darkness. The snake, now towering at Jasmine's side, hissed fiercely, its golden eyes blazing with intensity. Jasmine stood firm, her hand raised, the mark on her wrist glowing brighter with every second. "Stay close," she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "The light can hold them back." Carlos reached for her, his face pale with fear. "Jasmine, what do we do? There are too many of them." Jasmine didn't answer immediately. She closed her eyes, focusing on the hum she had felt earlier, the rhythm of the light within her. The snake coiled protectively in front of her, its body acting as a barrier between the shadows and the group. "They're drawn to fear," she said finally, her voice calm. "We can't let it control us." One of the shadows lunged, its tendrils slashing through the air. The snake struck with lightning speed, its golden fangs slicing through the darkness. The shadow recoiled with an unearthly shriek, dissolving into nothingness. The lead guard shouted, "It's working. We just need to keep them back." "No," Jasmine said, her glowing eyes snapping open. "We can't just fight them off. We have to close the breach." Carlos grabbed her arm. "How? What breach?" "The connection between their world and ours," she replied, her voice filled with certainty. "It's here in the mill. I can feel it." Dr. Patel, who had been observing silently, stepped forward. "If there's a breach, there must be a focal point, something anchoring the shadows to our world. Can you find it?" Jasmine nodded, the mark on her wrist pulsing as she turned toward the heart of the mill. The snake hissed again, its body coiling tighter as it prepared to move. "Follow me. Stay close." The group pressed forward, the shadows becoming more aggressive as they neared the center of the mill. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to ripple unnaturally. Jasmine's glow intensified, her light cutting a path through the darkness. Finally they reached it, a massive, swirling vortex of black and red energy suspended in midair. It pulsed violently, the shadows feeding from its core. Jasmine felt a wave of dread wash over her, but she pushed it aside. "That's it," she said, her voice firm. "That's where they're coming through." Carlos stared at the vortex, his face pale. "How do we stop something like that?" Jasmine looked down at the snake, which had coiled itself tightly around her feet. Its golden eyes met hers, and in that moment she understood. The light wasn't just within her, it was within them both. "We do it together," she said, stepping forward. "No," Carlos shouted, reaching for her. "You don't know what will happen." Jasmine turned to him, tears in her glowing eyes. "I have to, Carlos. If we don't stop this now, they'll destroy everything." The snake hissed, its hum growing louder, more resonant. Jasmine raised her hand, the mark on her wrist glowing so brightly it was almost blinding. The vortex pulsed in response, as if sensing the threat. Jasmine closed her eyes, focusing all her energy on the light within her. She felt it build rapidly, surging through her body like a tidal wave. The snake coiled tighter, its own glow merging with hers. Together they stepped into the vortex. The moment they entered, the shadows screamed, their forms writhing and dissolving. The vortex pushed against her, its energy cold and suffocating, but Jasmine held firm. She and the snake became one, a brilliant beam of light cutting through the darkness. The mill trembled as the vortex began to collapse. The shadows were pulled into it, their cries fading as the light consumed them. Jasmine felt the breach sealing, the connection between the worlds severing. Her body ached with the effort, but she didn't stop. Finally, with a deafening roar, the vortex imploded, taking the shadows with it. The mill fell silent, the air suddenly still. The glow around Jasmine faded, and she collapsed to the ground, the snake lying motionless beside her. Carlos rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he cradled her. "Jasmine. Jasmine, wake up." Her eyes fluttered open, the glow in them faint but still present. She managed a weak smile. "It's done," she whispered. "The breach is closed." Dr. Patel knelt beside them, checking her pulse. "She's alive," she said, relief flooding her voice. The guards lowered their weapons, their faces a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. The snake stirred, its body shrinking back to its original size. It slithered onto Jasmine's arm, coiling around her wrist protectively. Carlos held her tightly, tears streaming down his face. "You did it. You saved us." Jasmine rested her head against his chest, her voice soft. "I couldn't have done it alone. The light, it's not just mine. It's all of ours." As dawn broke over the ruined mill, the group emerged into the morning light. The shadows were gone and the world felt quieter, lighter. But Jasmine knew this was only the beginning. The light within her was still strong, and she would carry it for as long as it was needed. As Carlos helped her into the vehicle, she looked down at the snake coiled on her arm. It met her gaze with its golden eyes and she smiled faintly. Together they had faced the darkness and won. And together they would be ready for whatever came next.